Until Death, written and read by Christopher Halton. It was an absolute delight to receive an invitation from my dear friend David Iveson to spend the summer as a house guest at Montefiore House, a luxurious former Queen Anne country house that he had purchased and converted into an upmarket hotel in rural Sussex. David was always a budding entrepreneur, and having inherited a tidy sum of money, he decided to put it to good use when the house came onto the market following the death of its owner. Having spent the winter converting it into a 20-bedroom ensuite hotel, he wanted me to spend the summer there to provide him with valuable feedback from the perspective of a guest, ensuring that every facet of its operation catered to the most demanding of guests. As a travel writer and author, I was naturally the best choice for such an endeavour, and it would allow me the time and opportunity to complete my first novel without the annoying hindrances of having to work to supplement my income. So without reservation, I agreed. After having made arrangements with my housekeeper, Mrs. Dobson, to look after my home in Kew, London, I drove down in my Lanchester saloon, where I arrived on a hot and balmy day in June 1926. My initial impressions were very positive. The house of brick and stone glimmered in the sun, with a fine old oak tree offering the canopy of shade in the guest parking area opposite the entrance. On arrival, a polite young man and his assistant, both dressed in the livery of footmen, took my luggage into the hotel foyer, a spacious hallway with a sweeping brass staircase. At the reception desk I was met by my host, David. We both warmly greeted each other with an embrace and a handshake, and before settling down to chit-chat, he ordered the young men to carry my luggage to room 10, located on the second floor. David was my old friend from Cambridge, where we studied and lodged together. It had been over 10 years since we last saw each other, as we were both called to the colours as volunteers when the Great War broke out. He served in the Royal Artillery as a lieutenant, and I joined the Horse Guards, where I left in 1919 with the rank of Major. We were both lucky to have survived the war, although David walked with a slight limp following being struck by shrapnel during the Battle of Mons. He was an enigmatic chap, always full of life and energy, and during his university days he played fullback in the Cambridge rugby team. Having escorted me to the guest lounge, we settled for a Pimm's No. 1 with ice and lemon, which was served by a young and attractive blonde named Daphne, who, like all of his well-trained staff, exuded warmth. "So rather pleased to see you here again, old bean," said David. "It's jolly well been far too long since we last met." Looking me over, he continued, "And Harry, I can see you haven't changed one bit, you bounder." He then slapped his left leg. He continued, "But I caught one from Fritz, but that's all in the past." David, it should be said, was a tall, quite athletic-looking man with brown hair, blue eyes, a thin face, and a neat pencil-thin moustache, which decorated the upper lip of his rather small mouth. Immaculately dressed in a three-piece navy blue suit, with a rather flamboyant white handkerchief in his top pocket, he epitomized very much the upper social class of 1920s England. I, on the other hand, preferred a rumpled tweed jacket, an open-necked shirt and a cravat, but I digress. "Anyway," he said, "I brought you here for a bit of a holiday and hopefully to scout the place out for any improvements or suggestions on the operations here. I have some top-hole guests, and the place is becoming quite the social scene for the wealthy and the landed gentry and all that. And we even have a small Palm Court orchestra playing a weekend slot in the old orangery at the back. I think it is all rather spiffing, and lest I should forget, a staff pianist who plays here in the lounge on weekdays." I was, I admit, rather impressed with his arrangements, and I dared not ask what his guests were paying to be here. But if you have the money, you don't ask, so I let that question ride. From where we were sitting in comfortable club chairs, I could see among the guests some very high-profile individuals, with the odd lord or lady adding a touch of elegance to the place. His operations certainly struck me as a money magnet, and I was so pleased that he was able to put this all together. Afterwards, we both went to the restaurant, a large converted stately dining room, and the food and quality of service were of the highest standard, as was the attention of the staff. Rarely had I experienced something on this scale since before the Great War. Anyway, after catching up with old times, I went to my new room. As with the rest of the rooms, the quality was first class. A large bedroom with an ensuite bathroom, and these beautiful large windows allowed enough light to brighten the room on even the dullest of days. And the views across the rolling countryside from these windows were a stunning backdrop. Placed next to a window was a mahogany bonheur du jour writing desk which, although essentially designed for ladies, was suitable for my needs and purpose. The staff, I noted, had placed my clothes in a mahogany Regency chest of drawers, along with the shirts, suits, jackets and trousers, hung in an exquisite late 19th century French boule armoire. The suitcases were conveniently hidden in a small wall cupboard, and everything was meticulous and perfect. Later that day, I dressed for dinner and joined the guests in the restaurant dining hall. A maître d'hôtel directed us to our tables, where waiters were waiting to help us take our seats. The three-course meal, consisting of an entree of foie gras terrine, followed by a main course of wild turbot à la meunière and a later dessert of limon verbena panna cotta, was literally to die for. During the sitting, I was with a glamorous 30-something blonde who was bedecked with jewellery and introduced herself as Lady Fiona de la Manche, who was fun company to be with. I must admit, I instantly felt a strong attachment to her. Unlike an elderly couple who made up the four-seater dining table, a certain lady and Sir Bernard Barnes Davis, who were very stuffy individuals who constantly droned on about the state of the empire following the Great War. Frankly, if it were not for the charming presence of Lady Fiona, I should have fallen asleep with the boredom of their company. Afterwards, we retired to the terrace, where, while sitting under the stars, she enjoyed a cigarette on a smoking stick with a martini. I, on the other hand, drank a large tumbler of scotch and smoked a cigar. As her name suggests, she was of French stock, and her ancestors fled to England during the French Revolution. Her family dealt in precious minerals, and her grandfather built a huge fortune from which he later received a knighthood. I sat mesmerized by her beauty and the cadence of her clipped upper-class English accent. Her eyes gently drew me in, and her rouge-coloured lips looked soft and inviting, almost to the point of me wanting to kiss her. But as hard as it was, I resisted, as it would seem hugely inappropriate on my first meeting. So we chatted, and on one or two occasions I accidentally brushed my hand on her thigh and leg, as we were both being drawn into each other like a moth to a flame. The hours together passed like the passage of minutes, and as the time moved to midnight, she got up, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "I must go now, dear Harry. It is late. We will speak again, I am sure." With that, she arose from her seat and walked back into the house through some open French doors. She almost glided away as she walked, and her soft, slim, sinuous figure added to that illusion as she finally faded from view. I sat there quietly in contemplative thought. I could not believe my luck in having met someone so perfectly special. The following day I shared my previous night's experience with David, and he slapped me across the shoulder and jokingly said, "Well done, you cad," and added, "I can't say I've met her yet, old bean. Is she a guest here or a visitor?" A cold chill of potential loss electrified my spine as I replied, "Do you know what? I honestly don't know. I just assumed she was a guest." And then my mind floated back to the restaurant the previous night. There were well over 150 people dining, and of course not all could have been hotel guests due to room capacity. I mentally kicked myself and hoped, as she said, we would meet again. For the next week, Fiona never showed, and neither was she registered as a guest. Frankly, her absence was to me like an addiction, and so I took to taking long walks around the hotel's estate to clear my head. but it only made matters worse. In the far distance, I always saw a figure of a woman I thought was her but wasn't, or I would catch the waft of the perfume she wore that night, but there was nothing else. At night I started to see her in my dreams, and felt terribly disconsolate in the morning after awakening to find her not there. In short, I was at my wits' end with this, and was convinced within myself I had fallen in love after meeting my soulmate. After 3 weeks of pure torture, I saw Fiona again, but this time during the day, and in the churchyard of St. Martin's, a local medieval church. She stood staring at a grassy patch that bore no headstone and appeared to be shedding a tear. She was dressed quite elegantly in a light Edwardian summer dress, composed of fine white muslin, lightly sprigged with small embroidered motifs. The waist was raised directly beneath the bosom, encircled with a narrow ribbon sash, the ends of which hung gracefully at one side. On her head she wore a wide straw bonnet trimmed with ribbons of pale hue, and a light shawl of India muslin. Her dress, although beautiful and appropriate, seemed slightly old-fashioned, yet in some way it seemed more Regency in style. Regardless, she looked lovely and perhaps a little eccentric, as some wealthy women were known to be about fashion. She glanced over and saw me. She quickly reposed herself and put on a brave smile as she walked over, hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. "I am so sorry, Harry. I have meant to return to you, but for personal reasons I have not been able to do so. I really enjoyed your company and look forward to seeing you soon." I could see, despite her smile, sadness in her eyes, and they looked moist and quite red from crying. "Is everything all right with you, Fiona?" I asked as I clasped her hands gently. "Oh, it's just that I come here often to my great-grandfather's grave. He was my French ancestor, and he lived a hard and brutal life. When he died, all the family then could afford was a pauper's grave, which, as you can see, has lost its grave marker on its plot." I hugged her and kissed those tempting lips. I could feel her swoon, but she quickly pushed me away and said, "Not here, dear Harry, another time." The church bell clock struck 4 p.m. and she gathered herself to leave. There seemed to be a sense of urgency about her, but she promised that she would join me at the hotel one morning very soon. And as she walked away briskly, she turned and said in parting, "I won't let you down, my dear Harry." With that, she disappeared around the corner of the bell tower and was gone. Not wanting to waste an opportunity, I decided to follow after her, but alas, she was not to be seen. There were many aspects concerning Fiona which required explanation. I could only hope and pray that I would not be disappointed as I began to learn more of her. A few days later, I received a call to my room from the reception desk. Lady Fiona had called in to see me. I immediately smartened myself up and went down to reception, where she was now sitting in the lounge, drinking Earl Grey from a bone china cup and saucer. She stood up and seemed happy to see me with a big smile on her face. I joined her, gave a hug, and we both sat down together. Today she looked more conventionally dressed in a hacking jacket and breeches, and contrastingly different in personality to how I had last left her. We chatted briefly about the day, and she asked if I could ride horses. Pointing out that I was an ex-Horse Guards officer, I arranged with David to borrow 2 from his stables, which his stable lads saddled up for us. As Fiona knew the area well, I followed her across fields, fences and ditches for a brisk run to the ruins of a circa 16th century house of brick, plaster and timber, which appeared to have burnt down many years back, judging by the weeds and sapling trees which had engulfed what was left of the ruins. Stopping by a fence, we tied up the horses and wandered into the ruins. Turning to me with a hint of sadness in her face, she said that this was the family home around 20 years ago, when the property caught fire, trapping her family inside. Her father, mother and younger sisters, Agnes and Isolde, died in the flames, and being so isolated, the fire was not detected for 24 hours, which effectively cremated their remains. The air here felt palpably sad, and I could see that she was still deeply in shock after so many years had passed. I asked how she escaped, and she replied mournfully, "I sometimes wish I had perished with them, but I was away in London staying with my best chum, Hermione Gingstald." I said, "Surely there would have been staff here as well as your parents. What happened to them?" "Once a year, Daddy used to give them time off together and pay for a holiday to spend 2 weeks in Bournemouth. He did that to create space between the family and the staff. Mumsy used to cook for us and we helped with the cleaning. It was an opportunity to live briefly like normal people." I found her explanation rather odd, but her grief was real, and I had no reason to doubt her words. We spent the afternoon sitting by a nearby lake, and I discovered that she had been visiting the area for a couple of months before returning once more to her home in Richmond, London, which coincidentally was next door to where I lived in Kew. This for me was remarkable, as we could see each other more often. We then sat in silence, as love needs no words. It felt like the world belonged only to us. We nestled together beneath a great weeping willow, our arms entwined, lips meeting softly, as its long, slender branches surrendered to a tender breeze, its long green tresses trailing like silk curtains that danced and whispered above the shimmering surface of the lake. Time seemed to pause, every sigh of wind, every rustle of leaf, sealing us deeper into the moment. If heaven ever touched the earth, it was here, in this fleeting, perfect embrace. Having spent this brief moment in time together, it was time for us to return to the hotel, as Fiona had to leave that day to return to London. I was madly in love. I could not bear the parting which left my heart in sorrow, yearning only to be with the only true love of my life, my beautiful Fiona. When we arrived back at the stable, she took my address in Kew and said it would be easier for her to contact me there in September, as she had to travel to Europe on personal business. It was now August, and I decided to wait for her to contact me on her return to London. And once more this beautiful and very special lady parted from me again at the stables, and I saw her walk away towards the courtyard, where a taxi had been planned to pick her up. As she passed around the corner of the stable block, I started to unbridle the horses when I realized she had dropped a gold locket, and I immediately went after her to return it to her. As I entered the courtyard, there was no taxi nor any sign of her, which confused my sense of time, as I was certain she had only parted from me a few minutes earlier. But regardless, I put it down to the fact that my head was romantically in the clouds, and that she had presumably left before I got there. I did, however, ask a stable lad I saw walking with a horse whether he had seen a taxi in the courtyard, and he replied that he had not. I reasoned that the staff member was either a fool or that he was preoccupied with calming the horse, which seemed quite spooked by something, and so I returned to my room to prepare for dinner. But first I sat on the bed and opened the locket. It was Fiona, but oddly the case was engraved to "My dearest daughter from Papa, 1895. This was 30 years ago, yet the image of Fiona had not changed. I assumed that she may well have exchanged the photograph for something more recent. So placing the locket into a safe box I was carrying, I bathed and changed for dinner that evening. And so the weeks passed unerringly slow, and although my stay was without issue, it became a drudge, because all I wanted was to be with the light of my miserable existence, Fiona. David noticed that I seemed a lot less happy with my lot, and was concerned that there was an issue with the hotel service, which of course there was not. I reassured him that his fears were unfounded. "I have to be honest, David, your hospitality has been second to none. I can find no fault whatsoever with anything, but it is Lady Fiona, the lady I mentioned to you a while back. I am hopelessly in love with her, and will not see her again until I return home." David looked genuinely concerned for my plight and said, "I have to say, old bean, I haven't met this filly of yours, Lady Fiona. and feel dashed rotten that we never made the acquaintance. If there is anything I can do to help, please tell me." With that we parted company for the last time, as I intended to return home to Kew the next day, now that it was early September. That night I packed items that I no longer needed and intended to leave after breakfast the following day. As it was an unusually warm, balmy evening, I left my bedroom windows open and retired to bed. Around 1 a.m. I was awakened by a movement in my bedroom. As it was a moonlit evening, I could see what appeared to be someone standing near the window, their silhouette visible in the shadows of the curtains, which shuddered as if they had been touched. I was sure I was half dreaming, as the figure outlined reminded me of my beloved Lady Fiona. I called out to the figure, which quietly giggled and stepped into the moonlight's rays, and said with a mischievous smile, "Yes, my darling Harry, it is me, Fiona, the only love in your life that you will never want to part." The next morning the police attended room 10 and found the mortal remains of its guest, Harry Moncrief, a close friend of the hotel owner David Iveson, who was lying in bed with his throat cut. Around the wound were traces of lipstick, but save for a few drops of blood on the bedsheet, his wound was clean, and the coroner attending, Dr. J.K. Messenger, ascribed that to having had every drop sucked from him. Tapping a pipe on the bedstead and pulling out a plug of tobacco, which he pressed firmly into the pipe bowl, Detective Superintendent Mortimer paused momentarily. At the same time, he lit the tobacco and puffed away as he examined the scene of the crime. "Well, this is a strange turn-up for the books. Not a drop left, eh?" as he examined the wound. "Yes," replied the doctor, "and perhaps the weirdest scene of a crime I have ever been called to." Mortimer, turning to Detective Inspector Rowe, said, "Anything from the staff to report?" "Nothing, sir," he replied, and continued, "but we did find this locket in his belongings." Handing him the gold locket, he examined the inscribed writing on the case, with the photograph of an attractive woman inside, and remarked, "Any luck tracing the owner?" "Well, yes, sir. The lady was Lady Fiona de la Manche. I remember this case and her photo from my youth. She allegedly murdered her family by locking them inside the family home and setting the place on fire, because they discovered that she had murdered 2 young men for their blood." Dr. J.K. Messenger then cut in. "Oh yes, I have read about this in the Lancet." Mortimer responded, "Please explain." "It is a theoretical supposition that is characterized by an obsession with blood, sometimes linked to sexual arousal, compulsion, or a fixation. Some would say vampirism." Detective Inspector Rowe interjected. "I recall that de la Manche stalked her prey before getting them into bed and cutting their throats while making love. She would then suckle the wound to get her kicks." Dr. Messenger respondingly said, "However, this does not explain the majority of the missing blood. It would be impossible to consume this much blood without making a terrible mess on the bed sheets." Turning to Detective Inspector Rowe, Mortimer said, "Do we know where this woman is?" Rowe replied, "Well, here is the oddest part, sir. Before she could be arrested, she committed suicide, and she is apparently buried nearby in an unmarked grave at St. Martin's Church because surviving family members wanted nothing to do with her." Mortimer then added, "And yet we have her locket at a scene of a crime that fits her modus operandi, and it would seem our chief suspect is dead. How on earth will I ever explain this?" The end.